The last piece of this example to wrap up is trade. What would it look like for the farmer and the rancher to trade with each other? Under what context would trade happen? Well, in order for trade to occur, both people have to be made better off, or at least not worse off through trade. We can't force other people to trade with us. And since people only take actions where the benefit exceeds the cost, then we assume that all trade is mutually beneficial, at an individual level anyway. So trade between two individuals will only occur if the individuals are made better off, or at least not worse off, by that trade. In this context, we don't have any money. We don't have dollars. So we want to think about trading meat for potatoes or potatoes for meat in terms of the ratio of the two goods that we can trade for. So when I ask for the price of 1 pound of potatoes, I mean, how many pounds of meat would you have to give in order to get a pound of potatoes? Or how many pounds of meat would you get if you sold a pound of potatoes? I will always ask for the price of one good in terms of the other in this model because we haven't introduced the concept of money yet. All right, so to think about the price of potatoes, we want to think a little bit more carefully about the market for potatoes. Who is buying potatoes and who is selling potatoes, and how does that influence the price? So we know that if anyone is producing potatoes, it's the farmer. The farmer will be the seller of potatoes, and the rancher will be the purchaser of potatoes. It's likely in this case that the rancher will not produce as many potatoes as he would like to consume, so he will need to buy some from the farmer. All right, so how do the buyer and the seller help to set the prices? Well, you know, as a buyer, you don't want to pay a lot of money for something. The cheaper, the better. In fact, there's some maximum amount that you would be willing to pay for something. So the buyer sets the maximum price in the market, which we sometimes refer to as the buyer's reservation price. In this case, what's the most that the rancher would be willing to pay for a pound of potatoes? Well, if we go back to our opportunity cost table, we can see that the rancher can produce a pound of potatoes for a cost of 8 pounds of meat. So the rancher would never pay more than 8 pounds of meat to buy a pound of potatoes. All right, the rancher would never pay more than 8 pounds of meat for 1 pound of potatoes because that's the cost of making it himself. What about the farmer? Farmer is the seller. If you've ever sold anything, you know that you want the highest price possible. That's the money you get, right? The benefit you get from selling something. So the farmer wants the price to be as high as possible, but there is some price below which the farmer will not agree to sell the product. So the seller sets the minimum price in the market, which we sometimes refer to as the seller's reservation price. And those terms will come back in the next module. So we want to think about here in this example, what is the lowest price the farmer would accept in exchange for 1 pound of potatoes? Well, I think the first rule of business is probably don't sell something for less than the cost of making it. You'll lose money, right? So the same is true here. The cost for the farmer of producing a pound of potatoes is half of a pound of meat. That's how much meat he gives up in order to make the potatoes. He's not willing to trade those potatoes then for anything less than half a pound of meat. And so you can see that the price of 1 pound of potatoes is given by the opportunity cost for 1 pound of potatoes for each person producing in the market. All right, so this is the range of prices then at which both people would agree to trade. In other words, this is the range of prices at which specialization and trade would make both of these individuals better off, giving them more meat and more potatoes than they could produce individually.